we're reaping those rewards. That propels us into action. Researchers have found that shifting your focus from challenges to benefits is a good way to increase your aspiration to do initially unappealing things. For example, when Nicole Detling, a psychologist at the University of Utah, encouraged aerialists and speed skaters to picture themselves benefiting from a particular skill, they were much more motivated to practice it. A few years ago, I coached a CMO who was hesitant to learn about big data. Even though most of his peers were becoming converts, he'd convinced himself that he didn't have the time to get into it and that it wouldn't be that important to his industry. I finally realized that this was an aspiration problem and encouraged him to think of ways that getting up to speed on data-driven marketing could help him personally. He acknowledged that it would be useful to know more about how various segments of his customer base were responding to his team's online advertising and in-store marketing campaigns. I then invited him to imagine the situation he'd be in a year later if he was getting that data. He started to show some excitement, saying, "We would be testing different approaches simultaneously, both in-store and online. We'd have good, solid information about which ones were working and for whom, and we could save a lot of time and money by jettisoning the less effective approaches faster." I could almost feel his aspiration rising. Within a few months, he'd hired a data analytics expert, made a point of learning from her on a daily basis, and begun to rethink key campaigns in light of his new perspective and skills. Self-awareness. Over the past decade or so, most leaders have grown familiar with the concept of self-awareness. They understand that they need to solicit feedback and recognize how others see them. But when it comes to the need for learning, our assessments of ourselves, what we know and don't know, skills we have and don't have, can still be woefully inaccurate. In one study conducted by David Dunning, a Cornell University psychologist, 94% of college professors reported that they were doing above-average work. Clearly, almost half were wrong, many extremely so, and their self-deception surely diminished any appetite for development. Only 6% of respondents saw themselves as having a lot to learn about being an effective teacher. In my work, I've found that the people who evaluate themselves most accurately start the process inside their own heads. They accept that their perspective is often biased or flawed, and then strive for greater objectivity, which leaves them much more open to hearing and acting on others' opinions. The trick is to pay attention to how you talk to yourself about yourself and then question the validity of that self-talk. Let's say your boss has told you that your team isn't strong enough and that you need to get better at assessing and developing talent. Your initial reaction might be something like, "What? She's wrong. My team is strong." Most of us respond defensively to that sort of criticism, but as soon as you recognize what you're thinking, ask yourself, is that accurate? What facts do I have to support it? In the process of reflection, you may discover that you're wrong and your boss is right, or that the truth lies somewhere in between. You cover for some of your reports by doing things yourself, and one of them is inconsistent in meeting deadlines. However, two others are stars. Your inner voice is most useful when it reports the facts of a situation in this balanced way. It should serve as fair witness so that you're open to seeing the areas in which you could improve and how to do so. One CEO I know was convinced that he was a great manager and leader. He did have tremendous industry knowledge and great instincts about growing his business, and his board acknowledged those strengths. But he listened only to people who affirmed his view of himself and dismissed input about shortcomings. His team didn't feel engaged or inspired. When he finally started to question his assumptions, is everyone on my team focused and productive? If not, is there something I could be doing differently? He became much more aware of his developmental needs and open to feedback. He realized that it wasn't enough to have strategic insights. He had to share them with his reports and invite discussion, and then set clear priorities, backed by quarterly team and individual goals, regular progress checks, and troubleshooting sessions. Changing your inner narrative. Unsupportive self-talk. I don't need to learn this. Supportive self-talk. What would my